Welcome, as I've promised, a Gimp retouching course is next to my list, and here it is now. I'm going to use the latest version as I'm making this video, obviously. It's 2.10.38. Only go to gimp.org to download it if you haven't used Gimp before. Here you can find the saved download links. I'm going to link to it in the video description as well. So only use this one, then you can be sure that you're not going to get anything on your computer that you don't want to have there. If you've got Gimp already installed, check under Help about Gimp what version it is. You may have to update it, so check for updates. But usually nothing really changes on the front end, so everything, the layout, stuff like this, it looks the same for most versions. So you can even follow along with older versions, and usually you can also go along with newer versions as they don't change much about the layout. And when there is a giant update somewhere in the future on Gimp, I'm going to make a new course about that. Secondly, if you're a beginner, check out my channel. I've got a better course for you, which is my Gimp beginner course. Go to my Gimp tutorial for beginner playlist under photography, and here it is. Also free to use, Gimp beginner course. This is the course for you if you've never used Gimp before. And once you've worked your way through that, then come back for this retouching course. Inside of Gimp, we'll have to make sure that we're using the same layout and language. So we go to Edit Preferences. And here under Interface, the most important part is to set the language. We're going to use English US. When you have a different one, just pick English US, confirm, and then you have to restart Gimp. Second thing is we want to go to Window Management under Interface, and there you can reset the saved window positions to default values. So if your Gimp layout looks a little bit different than mine, just go to this window, confirm, and then restart it. Because sometimes you drag, for example, let me drag this one out here. All of these menus are draggable, and you may not be able to bring them back into the correct position. So I just want to make sure that we start with the same layout, and this can be ensured by using the default values right here. Left click on it to confirm. It tells you that you have to reset it, and then it's going to start with the default values and the default layout. So this is where we want to start. Final thing to add is, for the most part, I'm going to use images from a site called Unsplash. I use that in most of my tutorials. You can check that out on unsplash.com. It's a free website. These photos can be used commercially and non-commercially. In addition to that, you will find a link in the video description where I'm going to link to all the photos. If it doesn't fit into the video description, I'm just going to link a Google Docs that contains all of the links. Make sure to set that all up, check it out, and then we will start with photo retouching in Gimp in the next chapter. We'll start with an easy project. We're going to change the eye color. Just follow me step by step. As I've said, all photos that I'm using can be found in the video description. I like to work on copies, so I copy the original, but we have that as backup just in case something happens, and then I use the Paths tool. First step, just go over the outline roughly with the left click. Don't worry about curves. When you've arrived at the start point, hold Ctrl. This switches from design to edit mode, and then you can click on the start point to close the shape. In the next step, we're going to take care of the curves. Hover over the lines, left click drag, and then you get these handles to adjust the angle. Left click drag on them to do that. We've got the left eye covered, right click on it, use select, and then from path. This should give you a selection. Now let's zoom out a little bit. By the way, I hold Ctrl and use the mouse wheel for zooming. I go to the right hand side. I go over this outline of the right eye. Again, I hold Ctrl, use the mouse wheel for zooming in. I hold Ctrl, left click to close the shape, and I add the curves. Once that is done, right click again, select from path. This should be added to your selection. So now we've got both eyes now selected. I activate the move tool and our path is gone, but we can still see the selection. I'll create an empty new layer. Let me call that eye. I make it transparent. It's on top of the photo and it's active, so it's selected. Let me switch the color to red for now. Confirm we are okay. Use the bucket fill tool and then left click on your selection. This should be what you've got now. We're still on our eye layer and we'll change the blending mode to overlay. And now we can adjust the intensity using opacity right here. And let me switch to a natural eye color, maybe something greenish. I use the bucket fill tool again, left click on it. A little bit too intense, I just go down with the opacity and now it would look natural. As long as you haven't decided what color you want, just keep the selection. So maybe you want to make it bluish. Again, change the color, use the bucket fill tool, left click on it. Maybe you want to go to a more brownish color. Let me make that even darker. And here I could go up with the opacity again. When you've got the color that you want, go to select none. And now you can see it looks totally natural. Just in case you've deselected it and you want to change the color, just go to dockable dialogs and find the undo history right here. And then go back to the position where you still had the selection. So for me it was one step above here. And then you can use the bucket fill tool again. Let me, for example, make it bluish again. Maybe a little bit brighter. Something like this. I can left click on it. And we've got the eye color changed. Again, select none. I go down a little bit with the opacity. And now we have blue eyes. Part of learning Gimp is to just do it, so I would advise you to do that now. Pick the same image or find something else from Unsplash maybe, and then try to change the eye color before you continue with the next chapter. Let me show you how to remove red eyes. I copy the original as always and I work on a copy. There is an inbuilt red eye removal under Filters Enhance. Check the preview and you can see the effect applied in real time. Already looks good, but if you want to increase it, it might affect the skin. In this photo you can see that very clearly here on the nose, on the cheeks. If that happens to your photo, cancel this first and make a selection around the eyes before you apply it. Good idea to use the ellipse select. When you go to the tool options, you can find them under Windows, Dockable Dialogs. If you can't see them, left click on it. And then pick the second mode right here for adding parts to current selection. Let me uncheck this one. I don't want it to be expanded from center. And then resize it so that it covers this red area. Now I'll go to the other eye, and because I've got the second mode active, it keeps the first selection, so I can add a second one here. This is why we did that. That should be fine. I'm on this layer, go to Filters, Enhance, Red Eye Removal. And now I can intensify it without the skin being affected. Even for such an extreme result, it works. Go to select none and you still see a reddish halo. You press Ctrl Z to go back to your selection and then go to select and grow it a little bit. 5 pixels should be fine in most cases. This makes the circle, the selection a little bit bigger, and then we can go to reshow, red eye removal, increase it, confirm, Shift Ctrl A to deselect or go to select none, and now these reddish halos are gone. Let me show you how you can enhance the natural eye colors. At first we'll create 2 copies, one for the eye and one for the whites. And now we'll create selections for each. Let's go to the first one, the eyes. I use the ellipse select and I create a rough selection. Don't worry too much in the first step about the top part here. The circle is being cut off by the lid, which is normal when the eyes aren't fully open. Once you've got your basic selection, right click on this layer and add a layer mask. We want to pick selection and then confirm via add. So what we've got is this. I go to select none and now I use the paint brush tool. Black should be the foreground color. I can adjust the size right here and I'm on the layer mask. Now I can paint over this and get rid of it. You may have to adjust the hardness a little bit. Don't go too high or your edges are going to be very sharp. Around 50% should be fine. And that should be good. What we now do is we switch back to the layer. So from the layer mask to the layer, left click on it, I bring back the original. I'm on my eyes layer, go to colors. And here you have many options. You can, for example, use the easy saturation adjustment, which is a simple one slider effect. Or you go to hue and saturation, pick the master channel and center, and here you can increase the saturation. And you can see how this makes all of the colors, natural colors in the eye, a little bit more vivid. In this case, I would even go down with the lightness slightly. You can adjust the hue to add different colors if you want that. In our case, we don't want it. I've shown you in the last chapter how to colorize your eyes. In this case, just up with the saturation, a little bit down with the lightness. Not too much, but something like this. As I've said, you could also use the saturation adjustment. I don't want to do that on top here. And this is how you can enhance the natural eye color. Now let's take care of the whites. In this photo we can improve it a little bit and still keep this natural look. I use the paths tool, I'm on this whites layer, and then in the first step I roughly go over it with a left click. Don't worry about the curves here. When you've arrived at the start, hold Control, left click on it and it's close to shape. And now we can left click drag to adjust these curves. So hover over the line, left click drag. Hover over this point, left click drag to adjust the position a little bit. And there are handles that you can use. Left click drag on them to adjust the angle. Whenever you misclick, just press Ctrl Z to undo the last step. I'll move around in the image using the spacebar. And when I have to zoom, I'll hold Control and use the mouse wheel. This should be fine. You can live with that. The whites are selected. But it's not really a selection, it's just a shape. To turn it into a selection, we have to right click, use select, and then from path. Now we have our marching arms. If I activate the move tool, you can see the selection. I'm still on the whites layer. I right click on it and add a layer mask. Yet again, I use selection and confirm via add. I switch back to the layer, select none, and this is what we've created here. For the whites layer, I now go to colors, use exposure, and if you go down you can see this is the area that's affected. We want to go up a little bit, not too far or it's going to look unnatural. So here already 0.7 would be too much for my taste, but it depends on the photo that you use. 0.3 in this case should be fine. You can also try to play around with brightness and contrast. We obviously want to brighten it a little bit. When you go up with the contrast, you can see all of these reddish areas again. So for the most part, you want to go down just slightly and then confirm. And if we compare to the original, you can see we've enhanced this result, made the eye more vivid. Try it out yourself. As always, photo is in the video description. Next up, we want to fix dark circles on the eyes. I've got a very extreme example here, so we won't be able to recover it all without making it look totally unnatural. But if we want to keep the natural feel of it, we can fix quite a lot, even in this extreme example. First up, I copy the original and I give the original a fully black layer mask, so it's for full transparency. This makes it invisible. And now I want to paint over this. First, let me show you. We want to use the paintbrush and let me paint in black so that you can see what I'm actually painting here. So what I want to have is something like this. So you have to set the brush up to make it look like this. To do that, go down with the force quite a lot, or it's going to be too intense. So go down here. Below 10, I would say should be fine in most cases. I even go a little bit lower to around 4 or 5. Second, the hardness, don't crank it up fully. It's going to become too big then. 60, 70 should be fine. You can live with that and obviously adjust the size. Now let me get back to the layer mask and I switch it to white. And now I paint over these areas under the eyes, and even on top we can fix a couple of areas here. So this is what I've now selected, you could say, via this layer mask method. I do the same on the right hand side. Let us check. I can add some parts here. We only need a rough selection. It actually helps with the transitions when it's not perfect or a very hard edge. Now I switch back to the layer. So I'm not on the layer mask anymore, I'm on the layer of this copy. And then I go to colors, brighten and contrast. It's the first adjustment that you can try. Obviously we need to go up with the brightness, not too far. But in this extreme example we can go even above 15. Contrast, you want to add a little bit. This brings back a couple of colors. But be careful with the transitions, so don't go too hard with the contrast. Around 5 in my case should be fine. And I'll stay at around 20 here. And this has already helped quite a lot. Second adjustment, we can try exposure. We want to go up with it, keep the black level stable, and only a slight increase way below 0.5, maybe even below 0.3. At around 0.2, 3, something like this should be fine. Final adjustment, saturation. We want to add a little bit. This brings back a couple of colors and gives us a better transition. Something like this at around 1.0. And there you go. We were able to improve the results quite a lot. As I've said, it's an extreme example. So on the right, we can't recover it all without completely screwing it up. But that's a good result, makes the guy look a little bit younger. To sum it up, if you want to have that natural look, select the areas under the eyes. I've shown you the method, and then try out brightness, contrast, increase the brightness, a little bit of contrast should be increased as well. Then add some exposure to it, and finally add some saturation to have better transitions. In our next section, we want to improve the mouth area. First up, we'll whiten the teeth here, a little bit yellowish. We'll copy the original, and then I'll go over the top set of teeth. Don't worry too much in the first step about curves. We'll just left click and go over this roughly. When you've arrived at the start point, hold Ctrl to switch from design to edit mode, and then you can left click on the start to close the shape. Now we can hover over these lines, left click, drag to create curves. I'm not going to spend too much time here on the details. It's obvious the more time you put in, the better results will look. But for our tutorial, I'll just do it roughly. We should be fine with this. Then right click, select from path. Now we'll go to the bottom, set. And again, we'll use the paths tool, go over it in the first step only roughly. Don't worry too much about overlaps with the first selection. We can easily create paths inside of that once more. Hold Ctrl to close the shape. Again, when you're done, right click, select from path. Now we have our selection for both top and bottom. We can deselect the path tool. And now we can go to our copy layer, right click, add a layer mask, use selection, confirm via add. So what we have is a cutout of the teeth. Then switch to the layer. So from the layer mask to the layer, let me rename that to teeth. And now we can adjust it. But let me first go to select none so that we don't see the selection anymore, we don't need it. First up, I would advise you to try out saturation. It's the easiest adjustment. You want to go down, but not too far, it's going to look unnatural then. Second adjustment, brightness and contrast. Go up with the brightness. Again, not too far. Still want to preserve that natural look. For the contrast, don't do much with it. You can go down a little bit or a little bit up. Depends on the photo that you've got. And if that is not enough for you, you can try out the color temperature and increase the origin temperature, which is going to give it a colder, more bluish tone. And then confirm it. And there you go, a huge improvement. Just to recap, make the selection, then try out saturation, go down, go up with the brightness, and if that isn't enough, try out the color temperature and make it a little bit colder. Let us take care of the lips in this one. I'm going to show you how to intensify and recolor them. I'll copy that to work on the original, go over it using the path tool. Done that a couple of times, so first step, just go over it roughly. Second step is to close the shape by holding Ctrl and clicking on the start point. Third step is to add some curves. When you're happy, right click, select from path. In this case, we want to feather it out a little bit. We can do so under select, feather, I'll make that 10 pixels. Let me copy this again, I add a layer mask. And use selection. I forgot to select none. You can see we've got our lips selected. Now we'll go to the layer. So not the layer mask, the layer. Then go to colors, saturation, and you can crank it up. If you do too much, obviously it becomes unnatural, but you can go up quite a lot. This would still look natural. We can use brightness contrast. In this case, I would go down a little bit with the brightness and up with the contrast. As I've said, not that much. And this is a huge improvement compared to the original. So this is how I would intensify lips. If you want to recolor it, you have multiple options. I would advise you to use color balance and color temperature because it sticks close to the original. You can use the midtones and highlights here. And I recolor that like so. So this would be my method of choice. If you want to have something that is a little bit more extreme, you can use the colorize option. Let me copy this. And then I use colorize. But here some of the results will look unnatural and you can't save that. Let me for example pick a color like this. So this works just like we did with the eye retouching, the eye recoloring. But as I've said, I would use color balance or here color temperature because that stays in a certain color range and almost everything that you do here is going to look good. Let me show you a simple way to change the hair color. We'll create an empty layer on top of our original. We call it hair and I make it transparent, which is important. I'll start with a red color. And then I go to edit, fill with foreground color. Let me switch it to multiply. You can see everything properly. I right click on this layer, add a black, fully transparent layer mask. Now I use the brush tool and I make white my foreground color. I'm on the layer mask, so I don't paint on the red layer but on its layer mask. And now I go over the hair. You don't have to be perfect in this step, but the better you create this, let's say reddish outline of the hair, this reddish cover element, the less work you're going to have to do afterwards. Especially with these fine hairs, these smaller ones, you might have a problem depending on the color that we're going to use. But the first step is to just cover the area. we can somewhat live with that. Now all that you have to do is to go to the blending mode again and then use LCH hue or LCH color. In this case, LCH hue gives me good results. Here and there, you might have to clean it up. As I've said in the last step, you have to use the brush tool and then paint over it with a black color to get rid of this color. So again, we are on the layer mask then and not the layer. If you don't want to change the color, switch back to the layer and then you can use our usual options. For example, the color balance. Cyan and red will not do much here, but magenta green, you can see that changes the hair color right away. So I could make this blonde again, for example, and intensify the blonde by pushing it a little bit more towards yellow. So it is possible. You can also try brightness and contrast. In this case, I could make this a little bit more intense by going up with the brightness, down with the contrast. When you've got your selection done the right way and you've cleaned it up properly, it's now relatively easy to change this hair color. Let's return to the image from last chapter, and this time we're going to deal with this excess hair. I'm not going to clean it up fully. It can be a lot of work. In this example, I think it's easy. You want to use the clone and the healing brush tool. Hold Control to create your reference point. And in this case, as I've said, it's super easy because the background is very clean. But instead of using the healing brush, which leaves you a little bit of a blur, it's actually much better here to use the clone tool. So when I use the clone tool, we'll simply replace this hair with background. It's up to you where you want to stop. Obviously you don't want to go too far, and the better the makeup artist or hairstylist has done its job, the less problems you're going to have when you edit this. So it's a good idea to directly say that when you're a photographer and fix that before the editing, before you even take the photos. So now that we are somewhat good here, you can see there is a little bit of an edge being created right there at this position. So you may want to fix that and go over it again. What you can do is you can use the clone tool and sample better colors from the background, or you're just going to use the healing brush tool now and then create a blend just of the background. So after you've removed the excess hair, you're going to go over it in a second step to blend the background. So the original background with the one that we've created as a replacement for the hair. And when it's a photo studio image, this should be very easy to do. Now let's head over to a more detailed, a more complex example. So here we've got a natural environment. It's a bit blurred out, which makes it somewhat easier. But you can see if I use the heating brush, we're going to get a blend right away. So using the clone tool is the better choice in the first step, but you have to be careful. Number one is find a good direction. In this case, it would make more sense to move from top to bottom because of the architecture that's blurred out in the background. So it's a little bit vertical, therefore your brush movement should be vertical as well. And here in the second step as well, we're going to use the heating brush on top to blend this a little bit better. And as I've said, make sure to use vertical strokes, so vertical movements with the left click drag while one of these tools, in this case the heating brush, is active. This should be better. And that is compared to the original, and I think that's a good result. Especially when you zoom out and you wouldn't have known that there was something different here, that it was hair, you wouldn't notice. So you can use this two-step process, first the clone tool and then blend what you've created here using the heating brush, and then things should look nice. Once again, I'm not going to clean it up fully, but let us check the right hand side, because here that's very complex. I'll try to get a good result. Again, this would be way easier if the hairstylist would have done his job properly and the photographer would have kept an eye on it. But let us go over it using the clone tool first. We'll define hard edges, and then in the second step we use the heating brush and create our blends. And it's especially important to create blends where the edges are, so that we don't have these sharp, these high contrast areas. We want to have them blend a little bit. And you can see how much work this can become. So when you really want to have perfect results, it might be an hour-long process. But here you go. If you wouldn't know that there was something else, you wouldn't really notice. Try it out yourself. As always, the photos are in the video description. And then we'll start with the next chapter. Let us now add some hair to model. At first, the selection, let me get rid of this. The selection of the photos is important, so you want to have the same perspective and somewhat of a hair color that would fit. Then you use the free select tool on the hair part. Make sure to include the ears, it makes it easier to position the hair. You don't have to be perfect here. Just make sure that the entire hair is selected. Go to edit copy. Switch to the other one, then edit paste. It should be a floating object. Just click on new layer down here and it's pasted on a new layer. And now you reposition it using the move tool and scale it using the scale tool. Shift S is the shortcut for it. And then you can use the ears to somewhat position that where it should be. Once that is done, you can delete the excess parts in many ways. I would recommend trying the fuzzy select tool first. Just keep an eye on the thresholds. I go to 16 around here, that's fine. But you may have to adjust it. The higher the number is, the more parts will be part of your selection. And the lower you go, the less parts. So for most of these, you want to have a lower value. Once that is done, we'll add a layer mask to this hair layer. Then we use the paintbrush, make sure black is foreground color. My layer mask is fully white, and now if I paint in black over it, it's going to conceal parts. So we can clean up this mess here on the sides. And you can see this one blurs a little bit out naturally. It's due to the way it was in the original, so the way it was photographed. Can't really fix that. And that's what I mean, you have to check the photo that you choose and make sure that it fits the one that you want to apply to. But the process is always the same. So the same that I'm showing you here works on all other examples. We're somewhat done here with this step, but you can still see there is a little bit of color right here. So you may have to use the fuzzy select tool again. Make sure to switch to the layer because we want to delete stuff from the layer. I select it, press the delete key, and then when you want to paint with the paintbrush again, make sure to switch to the layer mask. That's important. Once that is done, we can add another layer or another method to make this more convincible. For that, I'll create a new empty layer. Let me call that adjustment. It's transparent and it's on top. Then I use the clone tool. You can sample colors holding Control and left clicking, but you want to sample from the hair layer. So go on this hair layer, then sample it, then switch to the adjustment and paint. And now you can add some of this hair to make the transitions more smoothly. In principle, you can go over the entire edge like this. But I don't want to make this an hour-long chapter of this course. It's just for the principle. And here I can clean this up again using the paintbrush. And that's what you have to do. So these three methods, you use the fuzzy select to get rid of parts, use the paintbrush for the smaller details on the edges, and then you use an adjustment layer with the clone tool to add parts to get better transitions. And then it's all about how much time do you invest. But this looks somewhat fine. Let's compare it to the original, and you can see we could get away with it. To sum it up, once again, the end of this chapter. So what we've done is we picked two photos, and we've created, using the quick selection tool, a cutout where there is hair. We've used edit, copy for that. And we've switched to the one where we want to apply the hair. We went to edit, paste. It was a floating element, so we clicked on new layer. We've scaled it and used the move tool to position it. Then we've used the fuzzy select tool. Pay attention to the threshold. Then we've added the layer mask to it and used the brush, the paintbrush with the black foreground color to clean it up. And finally, we've created an empty adjustment layer and used the clone tool. Always sample from your hair layer and then paint on the adjustment layer. Next up, we want to change the skin color. To do that, we'll copy the original and give it a layer mask. Make it black, full transparency, and you want to paint on the layer mask. Use a paintbrush, white foreground color. You can adjust the size here. Then go over the face, everywhere where there's skin visible. Hands if you've got that, shoulders, legs if it's a full body shot. If we make the region invisible, you can see we're bringing the face back and also the neck here. You have to be perfect in this first step. Just have a rough selection so that when you make the original invisible, you can see the face and you can see enough of it to adjust the skin and have a good reference. I think we're good with this one, at least for step 1. Step 2 is to switch back to the layer, so not the layer mask, we want to be on the layer, and then go to colors, hue, saturation. Pick the master channel, previous checked, and then you can adjust it using lightness and saturation. You can go up, down, but obviously if you go down with the lightness and up with the saturation too much, it's going to become unnatural. It's going to give you this orange tone. So you have to use both at the same time and adjust them a little bit in balance, you could say, so balance them out. If you want to make it lighter, crank both up. If you want to make it darker, push both down. Let me go a little bit more extreme here. So we have a good reference, but we'll have to work now on the edges. To do that, we'll switch back to the layer mask, use the paintbrush once more. Make this white. You can also press X to switch between black and white. And now you paint over the edges. So in this step you have to be a little bit more careful. On the hair, we can get away with painting over it, especially when it's darker hair. When it's lighter, you may have to be careful here and there and size down your brush, and then make sure that you don't cover too much hair. A couple of details to add. First up, the eyes. You want to get rid of the mask in the eyes. So we'll switch back to a black color and size the brush down. Still in the layer mask, and then we paint over the eye areas. This should bring back the original colors. See that here, left eye is fine, but on the right it's not. So it makes a difference to add this little detail. When it comes to the mouth, be careful. You don't want to cover the lips, because if you bring back the original color here on the lips, it totally looks unnatural. So just keep it here, but you can paint over the teeth. In my case, it's going to brighten them quite a lot. It's going to whiten them up. So there will be higher contrast, but in most cases that's fine. Makes the teeth even look better. But be aware of the lips to not cover them. And then finally, you want to watch out for earrings, nose piercings, stuff like this. So here you want to paint over with a very small brush, and once again a black color on the layer mask to bring back the original color. So these are details to watch out for. And if we compare that now, we've given her a nice 10 and changed the skin tone. As always, you'll find the image in the description below. Try it out yourself. And then let's remove a couple of pimples here and a birthmark. Works the same way, and we can use the clone tool or the healing tool. We already know these two tools. I've copied the original, then I hold Control and sample a good spot. And then I paint over these areas where I want to get rid of the pimples. And with the healing brush, this works quite well. Here's the birthmark, it also vanishes. If you just want to have a natural look, this is an easy way to do it. Sometimes you want to check the clone tool first and then go over it with the healing brush, but in this case I could directly use the healing brush and this all looks natural. To be honest, this was a very mild case, I would say, of acne, if it was at all. So let me show you a more severe example, but the same method applies. So we'll switch to this one here. You copy the original, then you control sample a color, and then you paint over these areas. Try to make sure to sample something that's close to the area where the pimple is, because that way you can keep the original colors and it looks more seamless, more natural. And you can see this also works on more intense cases. You have to obviously invest a little bit more time, but it's the same process and it gives us good results. As always, photos are in the description below. Try it out yourself. Let us go over a more extreme case. We're going to handle this like we did before in the beginning. So we use the healing brush. Make sure that hardness and force isn't that high. And then sample something, hold control, left click to have the spot selected, and then go over these areas. Be careful here with the eyebrows, for example, and with hair, especially facial hair, because it creates blends that you don't want to have. And this method that I'm going to show you here in 2 ways actually is not really the end or be all for a magazine cover or something, but it's going to preserve the original look, and we will have a vast improvement even for faces like this. Let us go over this in the first step. With the healing brush, you may want to turn to the clone tool here and there. As I said, it's just like we did before. Alright, we've somewhat managed to handle this quite well. It's a vast improvement. Let me copy this one, so this is the healing. And I've copied this, not the original. And now I want to apply a blur to it. We can go to Filters, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And you don't want to go too high, obviously. Just zoom in on the skin. And then find a good position. In our case, like a value between 1 and 2 should already be fine. You have to factor in that the higher you go, the more this is going to blur out, as the effect says. And therefore when you have a zoom level that's high, it's not going to look natural anymore. I think 2.5 was already a little bit too high for me here, but I go with it anyway. I go down with force and hardness a little bit more. And I've given this a layer mask, fully black, and I'll paint over it with white. Keep in mind I'm on the layer mask, not the layer. And you can see I can blur this now step by step. And this gives us better transitions compared to our last step where we've just used the heating brush. And I would say it was a little bit too high, 2.5. So a value between 1 and 2 is usually what you want to shoot for. And then you're going to get good results. So this would be method number 1. We can try something else. And this time I'm going to go a little bit lower with the values. Let me copy our healing layer again. And we'll make the blur invisible. And now follow me step by step. I want to call this high pass. But at first I want to change the blending mode to vivid light. And then here's the important step. You want to go to colors and invert the colors. Result should look almost like this. So almost grayed out everything. Then go to filters, enhance, and use the high pass. This should now bring back our model. Here you have two values and you want to balance them out. In one direction it brings the natural texture back, in the other it blurs it out more. Good values is actually hard to tell, but for the contrast I would go to around 1 up to 1.5 maybe. Understand that depth above. Don't go too high, like 2 to 5 should be fine. I'll go with these values, 3 and 1.3. Then right click on it, add a layer mask yet again, fully black, paint over it in white. Again, force and hardness I would stick to around 20 and go over the face. Make sure to only cover the skin. And here, as I've used lower values, the results are a little bit better. At least they look a little bit more natural. Both methods are valid. You may have to try here and there a little bit to find a good value. And if we compare this to the original, you can see the face has dramatically changed. And this is what I would use for extremer cases. You can use the same image to practice. As always, it's in the video description. You can deal with nails using all of the methods that I've already shown you. Copy the original and, for example, recolor one of these. We go to colorize and we focus on, let's say, this top nail here on the index finger. I want to make that reddish. It should be darker red. That's a fine color, I'll pick that. I confirm we're okay. Then I give this a black layer mask. And now I paint on the layer mask with a white color. Adjust size, hardness and force as much as needed. And then it's about how much time do you want to invest for the edges. I'm just going to speed up this video a little bit, and it's really just techniques that I've already shown you. We can enhance all of the nails. Let me copy the original again. And we can use all of the methods we, for example, use for recoloring hair or recoloring the skin tone. Let's just say brightness contrast. It's a good idea to go extreme first. Because now we give it a black layer mask. And now we paint over with a white color. And as it was an extreme adjustment, we can see this now properly. And once we've created our selection basically on the layer mask, we can use the typical methods, as I've said. Saturation, brightness, contrast. We can use colorize here to recolor it. We can use hue and saturation and play around there with the lightness. And this is how I would enhance these nails. As you've seen, nothing new, so these principles, they work on basically everything. Let us remove this tattoo. To do that, we'll copy the original. And you don't want to use the healing brush right away, because this would blend with it. Instead, you want to use the clone tool in the first step. Simple color holding control as always, and then you paint over it. It's a good idea to mix this up, so every line I draw, I set a new reference point, because that way I have more randomness when it comes to the skin texture. And also, sometimes the skin is a little bit darker on one side due to the lighting, so you want to mix that up as well. So first step is done, but we can still see that there was something. Therefore, we are now switching to the heating brush, and now we go over this area again. Once more, sample different reference points here and there to have randomness. And make sure to follow a little bit of the lighting. So here at the bottom, the skin is darker. So you want to sample something from there when you work on the bottom parts. And when you go to the middle or top parts where it's lighter, you want to sample something from that region that was naturally there. And then just go over it. It's going to blend with the skin below, and it's going to preserve this texture. And if you wouldn't have seen something being there, you wouldn't know that there had to be something. As always, keep an eye on hardness and force when you use clone tool and heating brush, but 50 for each should be enough for most cases. With the same methods, we can also remove piercings, but you have to watch out for shadows, for example. And here we have a dual lighting perspective, so we'll have to take care of a couple of things. But the process is the same that I've used, for example, for tattoo removal. At first use the clone tool and get rid of the big parts. Make sure to sample different points here and there using control and then left click. And in the second step you go over it with the heating brush. Here, for example, on the right hand side, on the nose, there's a dark shadow, and you want to make sure to preserve that. Here's just a shadow of the piercing, we can get rid of it. But then to the right, the eye has a big shadow, and this is what you want to keep. Therefore, we'll have to resample our reference points a couple of times. And then again, use the heating brush. But I think that's a good result. Let's take care of the nose, because here are a couple of spots where it's more complex. First two are just fine. But here the bigger one, what is it, a septum piercing, that's a tougher one. but still I use the same process. Number 1, here we have the shadow that we can get rid of, but then the dual lighting part comes into play, because here on the right it's way darker, on the left it's a little bit of a neon red, so we'll have to create a good blend. And we even have to take care of the lips a little bit as it overlaps. Here under the cheeks, you want to take care of this natural wrinkle and you want to keep it. So again, you have to work a little bit on the blend and get good transitions. This one should be fine. As always, you will find this photo in the description below if you want to work on the same for practice purposes. And there you go. This is how I can remove these piercings, and it all looks natural. So it's the same process. Clone tool, then heating brush. Make sure the transitions are good. Pay attention to shadows and to dual lighting situations, but then you should be good. And this concludes our Gimp retouching course. If you want to learn more about Gimp, I've got a couple of tutorials and courses already done. Just go to my channel homepage, scroll down, photography section, and here you should find my Gimp playlist. I tried to put the courses at the top, but there are almost 300 videos already. Some more shorter ones where I've answered a specific question. These multi-hour courses can be found at the top. In general, if there are more questions, let me know in the comments below. And if you want me to make a course about something, you have an idea and it's missing on my channel, let me know as well. If it's doable for me, I'm going to work on it. And as always, thank you for watching. I hope this course was helpful, and I'll see you next time.